study at University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, in the psychology department. Half was a literacy study, and it looks at 4 different schools in the Novi area to understand how instruction is related to achievement. And so I looked at the data, specifically looking at variables that were related to special education. So, like I said, it's ongoing. We've got the data from 4th to 6th grade for 4 schools. We ended up with 397 students, and 46 of them qualified for special education. Okay? So these are the things that these are the things that we look for to see if there was a correlation there. Mother's education, father's education, household income, the school that they were attending, the gender, and the race or ethnicity. Okay. And it turns out that there was no statistical significance with mother's education. Some people thought that that might be the case. Perhaps if the mother was highly educated, they could provide more help and instruction for the child at home, but there was no correlation there. Same thing with father's education. Surprisingly, with household income, that contradicted some of the other research out there. But when I thought about it, since the 4 schools are in the same district, it makes sense that the income is going to be close in the same range, right? So we're not taking people that live in Beverly Hills and then, people that live in, some urban area. So since this study was all done in the same district, there wasn't any statistical significance for household income. School attending, there was, surprisingly. There was one school that considerably diagnosed people or classified people for special education and compared to their peers. I'm not sure what those factors are. With gender, there was no statistical significance initially, but then I broke down special education into 2 groups. One group is behavioral reasons. So if you were put in special education for conduct disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, or attention deficit disorder, and then the other group is for learning difficulties like dyslexia or dyscalculia or something like that. So there was statistical significance if you were classified in special education for behavioral reasons. If you were a male, you were more likely to be placed in special education. But for academic reasons, no. And same thing with race and ethnicity. I further broke it down into 3 groups. One academic, one behavior, and the other one for health. So health would be like if you had vision impairment or hearing impairment or something like this. So for race in terms of behavior, you're more likely to be placed in special education if you're a minority, but you're not if it's for an academic reason, like a learning disability. And surprisingly for health, you're more likely to be placed in special education if you're Caucasian for a health reason than a minority. So there's a lot of reasons, there's a lot of literature out there about people with minorities being overly represented in special education. And so according to this study, it would say that the majority of those cases, or perhaps a large part of that, is because of the behavioral classifications, not for the learning disability classifications and not for the health classifications. So you're actually more likely to be placed in special education for a health impairment if you are a non-minority. So I found that to be one of the surprising things of the study. And so I'm going much over the time, so I need to hurry up. So the significance was 0.02, so that was well, the p-value was well under what we needed. And so very quickly, this is just a breakdown of the students that qualified for special education. So you can see here that whites are underrepresented. They made up 40% of the people in special education in these 4 schools, but 73% of the population that was looked at. Native Americans were the exact match of their representation. Asians were close. African Americans were overrepresented, and that is largely due to the behavioral classifications. and then you had other, which comprised Hispanics and other ethnicities. That was quick. So, so I'm gonna have to hurry up. So here's just a chart of academics, so you can see for Caucasians the mean of Caucasians as compared to Native Americans, for example, or for Asians, or even for African Americans. You can see clearly that there's a huge difference in the mean there when it comes to academic reasons, and then it's, you know, almost the opposite when it comes to behavioral reasons. So since my time is finished, we'll just go to the findings of the study. Minorities are more likely to be placed in special education for behavioral reasons, and I think that's a very important point, that you often hear, you know, minorities are more likely to be in special education, but why specifically? Because if a person has a health issue, it's actually the opposite. Perhaps they don't have access to the facilities, or perhaps they aren't being looked at in those ways. And so you might have minorities that are not getting the services that they need. So it's kind of like, it doesn't necessarily represent the situation correctly when you just say minorities are overrepresented in special education. You have to look at the nuances there that exist. And the last one, I'm not sure is the reason why I just presented the data, but some schools are more likely to qualify children for special education services, and then that would need more research and more investigation to find out why one of the particular schools from the 4 place children in special education at a much higher rate.
Wonder, is it really behavioral reasons, or, and you're having Down syndrome, a lot of her behaviors really were communication issues. So in being a minority, you may have more likely to me to have miscommunication. So that's what I wonder. Do you know? Is it more due to that fact, or it's hard to say?
I think it's a possibility, and the district. I think it's a possibility, and it could be that behaviors are misinterpreted. It could be, you know, that there's a lot of reasons for it. But definitely, I think how these behaviors are interpreted by the people that are teaching them, by the administration, definitely. And then also, like with behaviors, it's kind of like the squeaky wheel gets the attention. Mm-hmm. So, you know, you might not see the child that's sitting in the back of the class that's quiet, that might actually have a learning disability, but it's a different type of disability that sits in the class quietly. But if you have someone who's very talkative, or someone that's, you know, gets in fights a lot or something like that, it's more likely to grab people's attention, right? So, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
So I might get this wrong, but I heard that there's a new law in Michigan, if kids don't pass like a certain standardized test by 4th grade, then they have to repeat 4th grade or something like that. Do you think that will have a detriment, or do you think that will increase the amount of diagnoses for special education in the state?
Well, one thing I can say about repeating the grade is that repeating the grade never helps the child unless the child has significantly missed a lot of the school year, and this is what the research is showing. So there's actually, there's more negative aspects of repeating the grade, just socially and so forth and so on. Like if you couldn't get it the first time, then giving you the same variables in the same exact situation is not going to make anything different the next time. And so the outcomes aren't any more positive for students that repeat grades than they are for a person that goes on to the next grade with more supports. And then when you look at the person's self-esteem and the likelihood that they can be depressed and all these other factors, it's actually more detrimental for the child. But as far as with being qualifying for special education, would that increase it? I don't know. I can't see a correlation there. Maybe somebody else could answer.
Because I just know that kids in special education are excluded from that. So I'm assuming that I would think that like schools would want to diagnose more children so it doesn't look like they're having all these kids like held back. That would be, I mean, that's my theory, but.
I get your point. Did you have a
Yeah,
answer?
did you have,
Yeah, you can only exclude 5% of your school population, so even if you have more kids with special needs in your testing group, only 5% can be excluded. So I don't see that really, I mean, yes, it might happen, but it's only gonna happen to those kids who have the most significant needs, not kids who have more requirements. They still have to take the test.
yeah, and it actually says it's in third grade.
Third grade,
And
okay.
it's whether or not they proceed into fourth grade, and the law just came, like, just passed. And the last 3 weeks, I've had parents freaking out.
Oh my gosh.
And their kids all are in first grade, but they've been told by the schools that if they do not meet the.
Reading, right?
Yeah,
It's a reading goal?
Really, really.
It's a test, I don't know.
I think it's reading.
The rules in third grade are locked in
Yeah, and so,
based on kids' development.
yeah, and so, I mean, that is right now, what is being passed down in the legislation is that if you do not pass a certain reading standard by fourth grade. However, I do think that, and maybe you correct me on this, that if you have an IEP,
Yeah,
that is,
So I don't know for the law, but I know, like, for example, when you present test scores for like a whole district, only 5% of your special education population is exempt from those reporting and can be taking like an alternative assessment.
but that's like federal, that's like,
Right.
no, yeah.
So I don't know, I think there will be some kind of,
yeah.
they'll make some, because there's schools are.
Hi everyone. So for our project, we did a website which focused on teaching introductory aquatic skills for children. Didn't we say like under 4 and under? Yeah. 4 and under from a home-based setting. So we focused on children with ASD and other neurodevelopmental disabilities. So this is kind of morbid, so I'll try to go through this quickly. But so. Just to start off, accidental drowning deaths is a tricky number because drowning deaths are classified in different ways. They can be classified as homicide, they can be classified as suicide. So accidental drowning deaths are a classification by I think it's like the coroner, that determines that death is an accident. If like there is some like lock issues, if a child drowns at home and there is some negligence, that wouldn't be considered accidental. That would be considered like basically homicide. So in the United States, 7% of the area is covered by water. Drowning is the leading cause of accidental deaths in children 0 to 15 with ASD or other developmental disabilities. There's an average of just over 3,500 fatal drowning deaths each year. For non-fatal submergent injuries, and again, when I refer to drowning, that means like death. When I refer to non-fatal submergent injuries, that's if a child drowned but they did not die. So there's about 17,700 in the U.S. each year when children are taken to the emergency room. So that's how that's logged. And in Michigan, there's 41.5% of the state's covered by water. It's the second leading cause of accidents of children 0 to 14 in Michigan, and it's estimated that there's 3,600 non-fatal submersion injuries each year. Like I said, that's the accidental deaths is, I would say, an underreported number, but when you look at the non-fatal submersion injuries, that's kind of striking because that's 20% of the number in the United States. So Michigan takes up 20% of that. So just to talk about the effects of non-fatal drowning, the rates are a lot higher for children 4 years and under, and males. It only takes 4 minutes without oxygen to have non-fatal drowning effects, which are brain damage, memory loss, cognitive impairments, and permanent loss of function, and also PTSD.
Those are just a few of them.
Just a few, yeah. Okay, so kind of how we got in the idea for our project. So the CDC recommends that all children between 2 and 4 enroll in swim lessons. So that can be hard for a family with a child with ASD or other neurodevelopmental disabilities. Some of the factors would be limited access to aquatics, to pools, environments, lack of financial means. Swim lessons are expensive, and unable to find swim classes that are inclusive. Me and Katie both worked as swim instructors. They don't give you special training for children with disabilities. In some places for the insurance, they won't accept children, which I think is terrible. And also negative experience at previous swim classes. I've had kids with disabilities who've come into lessons and their parents said, oh yeah, for the first day at another place, I'm gonna say Goldfish, but please don't, I don't know where it was. Oh, at the first day at Goldfish, they threw my kid in the deep end and they're traumatized. And I'm like, holy crap. So 4-year-olds. So they could have negative experience. But participation in formal swim lessons can reduce the likelihood of childhood drowning by 88%.
So factors contributing to these accidental drownings and conditions and disparities that contribute to that are lack of swimming ability. Like Emily said, we were both trained at different places for swim lessons, and they did not teach us how to interact with children with disabilities and how to teach them. So that kind of contributes to their abilities. Lack or lapse of supervision by the parents or by lifeguards. Lack of physical barriers, so physical barriers meaning walls or things that prevent the children from entering the pool or body of water.
A lock, a gate.
Failure to wear life jackets or jackets that are suitable for those children. And seizure disorders that may not be recognized by lifeguards or parents or people that are watching the children. Approximately 80% of fatal drowning victims are male, so that it's more common in males. And children 1 to 4 years old have the highest drowning rates. And then African Americans from the ages of 5 to 14 years have 3 times higher rate of accidental drowning than their white peers, and then it's even more increased in swimming pools. And so the Applied Behavior Center for Autism has a multi-level approach to this safety training. So empowering children to understand the safety of around water, learning water safety as a family and really including that and teaching your children, being proactive as a parent, watching your children in those bodies of water, not being on your cell phone, not socializing, not drinking while you're watching your children, proper safety precautions and teaching those. A week before you go to the pool, going over those and really having the child understand this is what we need to do. Running, don't dive headfirst into the pool, and having a game plan in case of emergency, in case something happens, knowing how to respond, having those protocols in place, especially in places that you go to often that they may need to be training for those at those areas. So this video goes over I think it's 2 case studies. We might just do 1, but they're case studies, little cartoons that show families and their experiences.
Being water safe means taking the proper precautions in the home as well as around open water and pools. Water safety is important for any family, but this is especially true for families of children with special needs. The Gomez family loves to swim, but they know that fun in the water starts with finding the right life jacket. For Luis, getting out of his wheelchair for water therapy is both a good time and good for his health. Since a regular Coast Guard approved life jacket doesn't meet all of Luis's physical needs, the Gomez's need to find an adaptive life jacket that is more supportive and comfortable for him. There are multiple designs for children with unique needs, so Luis tries on several adaptive life jackets to find the best one for him. Since Luis is unable to swim independently, his parents or a caregiver are always within an arm's reach, even though he is always wearing his life jacket. This applies to any body of water, whether that's a neighbor's pool, a lake, the community pool, or at the beach. The Jones family faces a different set of challenges with Harold. His condition can make it difficult to remain safe around any type of water, since some children with cognitive disorders are often drawn to water and have a difficult time understanding that it can be dangerous. Like the Gomez family, the Joneses are always within an arm's reach of Harold when he is near water, including bathtubs, toilets, pools, and hot tubs. To make the home environment as safe as possible for Harold, they make sure to drain the water immediately after a bath, install locks on toilet lids, and immediately empty all buckets, wading pools, and other containers after each use. Because of Harold's cognitive disability, he must always wear a life jacket when playing near a pool, lake, river, or any body of water. The Joneses also explain basic water safety practices to Harold on a regular basis and remind him to never go near or in the water without an adult. One way they familiarize Harold with the water and get him comfortable with swimming is by taking adaptive aquatics classes as a family. These classes can be especially useful for children with cognitive disorders and will teach the Joneses how to work one-on-one with Harold, helping him adjust to water and learn important swimming skills and general water safety principles.
All right, so I'm gonna stop it right here. So a lot of our videos that we did for the website are like that. I don't like the sound of my voice, so I'm not gonna play any parts. Okay, so just a little disclaimer. So there isn't an equal substitute for formal swim lessons, but a lot of the intro skills can be taught from the bathtub. So our goal for this project was to develop learning modules on water safety, videos and resources, with the goal of helping children develop a comfort and confidence in the water, and also educate parents on water supervision and drowning prevention.
So these are just a few of the bathtubs. The top one is a European base and the bottom one is a Korean base.
If you don't have a bathtub at home, so if you're like, we only have a shower, you know, there's different methods.
And these are a few of the things that can be taught in bathtubs. You don't have to have that pool, so vertical cues, the idea of a back folder, front float, motor skills, going doubles, you can see, just all of these things that can get used to these motions in the water.
So here are the Red Cross's minimal aquatic skills for deep water. So if your kid doesn't have that, they should be wearing a life jacket, which is stepping out of the pool or jumping into the pool with water over your head, returning to the surface, able to do a full length of the pool, which is 25 yards, and exit the pooling area. And I'm going to say a lot of kids cannot do this. We give swim tests all the time, and parents are like, no, my kid swims fine. Well, after being in the winter all year, they probably don't.
And those are kids without disabilities too,
Yes.
so this is very challenging.
So this is just the water safety skills that we had videos on. So in future improvements for our website, what we want to really do is create a water safety checklist generator. There's an example on the screen, and that's a really good way to just go over with your kid, also to get your kind of memory back. You can go over the rules with them. So what we want to do is be able to like have people type in things and also have generated ones too. So we want to allow users to create their own checklist and download it. And any questions? And this is actually a picture of my dog with a life jacket on. Who he didn't like it, so I had to return it, but he looks very happy.
You didn't pass your checklist?
No.
Super cute.
Any questions? Yes.
What do you think, just from the life perspective in mind, from the interdisciplinary perspective, how do you envision that? So this is for families to use on their own, but from different disciplines, how do you think that would matter?
How would it matter? Well, like water therapy is very good in like OT, PT. I don't know about speech, it could be. But kids, I just think we live in Michigan where it's 41.5% of the our land is covered by water. Everyone should know how to swim.
So OT and PT are definitely things that use water. I worked at a traumatic brain injury facility that had a pool, and they use that a lot in their treatment. But other than that, I think going to the pediatrician, doctors should have these resources available for their parents readily, because it's not really talked about really, and you have these accidental drownings that parents do not want, obviously, and so it's something that they're not aware of. They don't know the signs. They don't know what to do if something happens. So having these available at different offices is good.
Yes.
I think this is fantastic. I have done a lot of, I was a lifeguard and used to teach swim lessons to kids with developmental disabilities, and just with the parents now that I work with, I think having this resource can be very helpful, because I think this takes families out of doing a lot of activities that are very present here in Michigan. And I think this provides a good service to them.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, Sandy?
I think our county, and I don't know how many counties in Michigan do it, but our kids all go through a voter safety class.
A boater safety?
A voter safety. And
Yeah.
I think it would make so much more sense to put them on the class.
Oh, I think that's one that should be like, I think it should be county resource.
And that's only in certain areas too, where there are those large bodies of water. Ann Arbor, where I grew up, and we did not have boater safety.
We didn't have
So,
boater
There's a lot of water. I mean,
Yeah.
you've got a couple of lakes nearby.
yeah.
I think it's kind of crazy what they do instead.
But in my neighborhood, there is like a pond that you could not put a boat on it, and like 3 kids have drowned in that, so. Yes.
I just wanted to say that this is really cool too, and something I just recently got a job at the Center for Autism in Grand Rapids, and definitely gonna kind of propose this as something that they could teach to their students, because they're from ages 1 to 4. And I feel like it's super important. If they're learning how to be potty trained, they should learn how to not drown and swim as well. In my opinion.
They like water, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the thing, is they love being in water. So
Yeah.
it's,
It's a sensory thing. Yeah.
I was gonna say, yeah, similar like you guys, I've built a curriculum like this for autistic children when I was working in LA. But now I like to use it with my patients as like a way to get their children to exercise. It's a lot easier to convince your child to go swimming than it is to go to like run at the gym or something like that. So I think it's really great what you guys do here.
Yes.
Very quickly, I've worked with children in the hospital setting because they still get access to special education services. They're going to be there for some time. And a lot of places deny kids access to the pools and stuff. And so like when I ask why, they say, well, maybe they might urinate or defecate in the pool, or the child might be more of a risk or something like that.
They say that it's liability. Yeah, they'll say a lot of things,
But it seems like that should almost be illegal to
It is.
restrict.
It is. That's ADA. But
What would you say to, I don't know, to professionals or practitioners that restrict access to children with disabilities to go to the pool out of fear that they?
out of fear,
Yeah.
I would just
Fear
say
of
to
being
educate your
sued or-
child, to tell them what's going on, explain those pool rules to them, talk to the lifeguard, just be proactive about it, but even before you go. I think when I worked at Michigan State as a lifeguard, one thing, there was a family or a child with Down syndrome who'd come in, and the parents every single time would ask us, the lifeguards, to sit down with him and go over the pool rules with him. And that was fine, because he was a lot better. And once he got it in his head, he was good. So I just think that with some children, you can just say things once and just be like, okay, yeah. But other kids, you really have to drive it in. And I think that's the first step.
And then just being cognizant as a parent or as a caregiver or whatever, making sure they have that life jacket if they need it, that it's correctly fitting, and that you're looking for those signs for accidental drowning. It can aspirate, and it can be in a matter of seconds. Like, it was 1 to 4 minutes, but it can be a matter of seconds. So just knowing those signs and jumping in and right away.
Any other questions?
I know this wasn't exactly like your project, but that video kind of made me think of the fact that it says like children with autism really like water and stuff like that. Did you see anything about bathtub safety? Not so much like swimming, but not turning it on to like scalding hot or anything like that? Because I actually know a family who the kid just loves going in the shower, but he doesn't understand the difference between turning it all the way at hot and cold. Is there any?
So I did see a lot of stuff, because some kids with autism are drawn to water, so they'll turn it on when their parents are gone, so they know how to do it themselves. And so there is like locks you can put on certain like of the knobs or whatever. It works for some of them. And then there's guards for the actual like shower. Yeah.
As far as learning as well, occupational therapy works a lot with sensory issues that happens after, it could be with a spinal cord injury or something like that. But same thing with autism, and when they have sensory modulation disorder and stuff like that, you have to just kind of work with them and teach them what is appropriate, and also monitor.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
my L.I.F.E project, what I chose to do was a project about camps in Michigan for kids with special needs. Because I am a firm believer that every kid should go to camp, no matter what their ability or disability is. I didn't grow up going to camps. I went to a few as I was growing up, but early in my nursing career, I started volunteering at muscular dystrophy camps, and I did that for 14 years as a house mom with kids with dystrophy. And my own kids have gone to camps for probably as long as we've been able to send them. Having worked with many types of camps, I've seen amazing things. I was a nurse at Central's speech and, I don't know what they call it, I call it speech camp, but their summer program where they have kids come in with communication disorders through the summer. And when it used to be a residential program, I was one of the nurses. I would go over and I'd pass meds at noontime. And I watched one little girl from the UP come in with autism, absolutely no eye contact. Her poor dad was just frazzled. He was a single dad, and he was just kind of really looking forward to the respite and hoping that something could be done with this young lady. She was about 13. She had her balance ball, her yoga ball that came with her, and that was her comfort item. And I watched her come into that camp, totally speaking single words, no eye contact. And I watched her leave at the end of that 5 weeks, standing face-to-face, direct eye contact, holding full conversations with people. It was amazing. So I am a huge believer in kids going to camp. I did this because every year at work, part of my job as a nurse with children's special health care is to help families get whatever resources they may need for their child. And every year it comes up, we push and push families to go to camp. And we say, you know, if you can find a camp or we can help you find a camp. We work through the Family Center with camp scholarships. We work with them to find resources to send their kids to camp. A lot of these are expensive. I think Central's is about $1,500 for the summer. Diabetes camp that my daughter's at this year, $950 for 2 weeks. So it's a lot of money for a family to put out, but it's, you know, it's well worth the effort if they can get them there. So every year it comes up, what new resources do we have? You know, can we find the lions or the eagles or the moose or whoever happens to be the funding source after we find the camp and help them do all that. So it just seemed like every year we were doing the same thing. So I said, this year I'm going to make a permanent record and update it as we can. We help them, like I say, we help them find the resources. So looking at this, this is a working document. What I found was not obviously all the camps in Michigan. Every kid with a special need can go to any camp as long as that camp is willing to work with them, work with the parents. My daughter's hearing impaired. She could go to any camp, but she goes to Lions Bear Lake Camp for the week that they do kids with hearing impairments because I know that her $1,000 hearing aids are going to be safe because when she goes to the water, they have a little shoe rack hanging there where each kid puts their hearing aids in so they don't get wet. I know my kid with diabetes, they do the same thing. They put her insulin pump in a little shoe rack down at the waterfront so that nothing gets ruined. A typical camp that isn't used to working with those things may not have that foresight to do that. So as a parent, it's a safety measure for me knowing that their equipment is going to be well taken care of. So like I say, any camp can usually do it. I've had kids with diabetes go to a wrestling camp. Fine, as long as that those people know how to take care of them while they're there. So this list is not all inclusive, but I did try to list all the major camps. The plan for this document is at our next regional meeting for Children's Special Health Care, which is in June, where there's 3 different meetings throughout the state. All the Children's Special Health Care staff is there. Lisa and Ayana from the Family Center. We're going to roll this out to them. It's also going to be available for all the health departments in Michigan through Children's Special Health Care to have access to it. Because they probably have a camp, a local camp, that they use a lot. And I don't have the means to do all that. But some of the major ones on here, Bear Lake, obviously, kids with hearing impairments, juvenile arthritis, and blindness. Camp Medici is the biggest one in the country for kids with diabetes. And North Star Reach, which is in Pinckney, it's a fairly new camp. They do specialty weeks. They'll do a week for cardiac kids. They've taken over the epilepsy group, and their goal is to get kids there that need chemo and dialysis. So they're very, very well medically equipped, and they're free. These kids go free. So that's a biggie for us. And on the back, I've got just some of the possible scholarship opportunities, some of the websites. And I know not every health department, not every children's special health care, and every health department is as well staffed or as driven as we are to get our kids to camp. But hopefully this will make it easier for the health departments if they don't have to go on their own and look things up. Any questions?
I'm sorry.
So do they receive services at the camp?
Depending on the camp. There's a camp up in the UP called Bay Cliff, where it's residential and it's all summer, and they get the full spectrum of PTOT speech. Yeah, that one is very expensive, but there are kids that are there all summer.
I just want to add that Bay Cliff also has dental services because we have dental students from the University of Michigan School of Dentistry, pediatric dentistry residents, and faculty that go up to Bay Cliff and provide
That's great.
dental services.
That's great. Do you have a question?
I just want to say I love your project, and I worked for one of the camps on your list for 5 years.
Which one?
Camp Grace Bentley.
Okay.
For 5 summers, and I just wanted to kind of throw out there, which wasn't on your list. A lot of the camps do ratios, so like 1 counselor to like 4 campers, so 1-on-1, 1-on-3. So that's kind of a big aspect, and also like you said, the prices can be really steep, but a lot of camps aren't like just for children with special needs. I know that like we didn't advertise that we were super inclusive, even though like Camp Grace Bentley was. We had a lot of siblings that came. Like we were only $450 camp. Like you couldn't beat that price for 9 days. So we had a ton of siblings come too.
Which is helpful.
Yes.
And I know North Star Reach does siblings only camps.
Yeah.
For siblings of kids with special needs, so they have their time too.
And so is Fowlerville.
Yeah.
Sandy, do you know, are there resources for camps that want to be more inclusive, like tips or pointers, or in turn, things for families that they can share with the camp on how they can be more inclusive for their child? The child is going just to a camp.
I know my coworkers and I have worked with camps to, the parents want to send their child to camp who may be in a wheelchair and have all these unique needs. We've had the camp call us directly, and we've helped them explain. If we can, we get an IEP from school, or we get a report from a therapist. When I did volunteered at Muscular Dystrophy, we always had their home programs, their physical therapy programs sent in, and during rest periods, we were doing stretching exercises and things like that. So, yeah.
I just want to give a little plug for the CMU speech language camp. We offer half-day and full-day placements. The half-day are $700 and the full-day are $1,400. But I'm happy to say that we've never turned away a family because of financial issues. We make it a point that any family that needs assistance gets some sort of assistance. Even if it doesn't cover their full scholarship, we do make sure that they get something. And so we've never had a family not be able to come because of that, as far as I know. So if you are thinking about recommending families, even from far away, we work with the residential housing. There's apartment complexes on campus for families that are from Detroit that don't want to drive 2 or 3 hours every single day. They work with those apartment complexes to get discounted rent rates so that they can move to Mount Pleasant for the 5 weeks. We have families that also bring their campers, and the golf course gives them a discount on the campground to bring their camper for 5 weeks. So if you do have families you're thinking about recommending, it's a great program. The amount of intervention these children receive equates to 2 years in the school system in just 5 weeks. So just for all of you guys as professionals, if you have kids that you want to recommend, there are ways to do it even from Detroit or Ann Arbor. We really work with you to make it happen. And all of the graduate students get intensive therapy experience because we're the ones that do all the therapy under supervision.
And for Central's camp, Camp Medica, Lions Bear Lake, the Lions Club, they are huge supporters of getting these kids to camp. And interestingly, a month ago, I had the Lions Club call me at work and say, we're having a regional meeting. Would you guys be willing to come and do a report on crippled children? So I said, well, we're not actually crippled children anymore. We're children's special health care. So we put together a PowerPoint presentation explaining what children's special health care is and thanking them for being such supporters of things like, you know, the camps my daughters have done, like SSC and Camp Medica. So now they have asked us to come to the local Lions Club, and which is good because I haven't had a Lions Club contact. My camp contact passed away like 5 years ago, and he wasn't even in Midland. So now we're going to have a local contact to be able to say, hey, you know, can we count on you guys for camp scholarships and who do we need to contact? So it's kind of nice that that's all rolled around.
Thank you so much.
Okay, hi, my name is Jay. I am from the University of Michigan School of Dentistry. I'm a fourth-year dental student there. I'll also be starting as a first-year MBA student at Ross, the School of Business. My life project is called My Special Dear, Dental Education and Resources of Michigan. Okay. So when I started in my LIM program, I had two goals. I wanted to accomplish two things. One, gain knowledge base and expand sort of my understanding of this space, right? And secondly, I wanted to find ways to combat compassion fatigue in treating patients with special needs. And I think the two most valuable experiences that I've had through this program that pair up with these objectives, one, Family Resource Project, and secondly, Family Visiting Program. Family Resource Project, I presented in November for Module 4. I'm sure most of you, I hope most of you remember, it was a conglomerate of resources and educational material for, in terms of dental education or dental resources available in this local area, and I separated them out by the kind of questions about dental care that I thought the families and patients would have. And I'll show you a little bit of that again. But it was a result of a lot of time and energy that most families wouldn't necessarily have, just because of all the daily challenges that they have to go through, and that includes the non-dental professionals who are busy with their own lives as well. And so I wanted to make it more available and accessible for the people that are not in the world of dentistry. And so I thought, how can I do that? A lot of people may not have mobile, like laptops and computers, but nowadays most people have phones. So I wanted to see if I can develop an application that people can easily access, free of charge. So then I went to the brilliant Miss Megan Thompson. So then we got together and then we started brainstorming. We drew up a structured blueprint of the application, and then I created a logo. This is what it initially looked like. In the end, we made some tweaks to the design, still kind of a rudimentary, but we changed it because Emily thought that there being a face on a tooth was creepy enough. Got the arms or dental instruments, we got rid of those.
It does.
Okay, so this is what the homepage of the application looks like. We have the logo, dental education and resources, and do I operate here? Yeah. And we have two shortcuts here. Local dentists and questions. Local dentists and questions, both of those are in the menu once again.
Did you click on it?
Yeah, there you go. So resources by topic is my FRP, my Family Resource Project. So when you go down, it kind of gives you an overview of what it's about, and then again, you're able to navigate through the questions. In the interest of time, I won't go into all the links, but you click on each question and it gives you the links and the basic information for each topic. Okay, so you can go down the list and then you can navigate to the next question if you choose to. So that's one aspect of the application, and then you go back to the menu. And I think, so I'm just going to skip to the local dentist part. So this part, so Autism Speaks was given a large grant to populate dental resources, dental clinics that are available to take new patients and also have familiarity with patients with special needs care. So I just provided a link to their website where they can type in their zip code and the radius, and then the system will be able to populate the dentist in that area for you so that they can have easier access.
Push the back button.
Push the back button. Okay. And then I think ask questions part. I think this is the golden part of this application. So what this does is that it provides an avenue for the users to ask questions directly to the professionals or training students in the areas that I'm going to demonstrate. So this is a way for people that have questions but simply don't know where to go to, who to go to shoot a question and get an answer hopefully within by a week of time or so. Okay, so they're going to click on the ask questions part and they'll identify themselves as the person with a disability that's looking for resources. Those are more like 50 seconds, not 5 minutes. So I'm just going to demonstrate. So let's say I'm the user, and I am the person with the disability, and I'm seeking information for myself, and my name is Jay. I'll type up my email address. Can I go down somehow?
I don't know.
Press it down there.
I think it's good, Jay.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Then I can show my statement. Okay. I'm just going to go straight to the Qualtrics page that whose survey information is embedded into this application. So let me just go straight to that page.
No one's gonna steal his password.
Okay, so self, J, email, and here you get to pick which professions you have questions about. So it includes fields outside of dentistry as well. So let's say you're going to click on dentistry, and then you click on medicine, audiology, what have you. And then, yes, or some of them, age, blah, blah, blah. So what we're doing here is by asking these preliminary questions, we're gathering the data that will be useful for the professionals that will be getting the questions from the users. So with this information, the clinicians will be able to provide a more accurate and more relevant, pertinent information back to the users. Now, here's where they get to ask a question. Again, this will be viewable on a phone like this. Now, this is also where the user would acknowledge the fact that because the clinicians are getting these questions directly from me without having seen me or the person with the disability for whom I'm asking the question, the nature of their answers will be limited, right? And here they have to sign acknowledging the fact that this application is not HIPAA compliant at this point. So refrain from providing any specific identifiers and understand that any clinical action you would take from moving forward solely based on the information that you share through this application, the clinicians addressing your question are not responsible for them. So this provides protection for the clinicians that are using the app. So looking back at the list of professions where the user would have to check off, based on what they check off, I'm going to be creating, I currently have a roster of people that have shown interest in being included in that listserv. So for each profession, I'm going to have a different listserv, and based on what the user clicks, their question will be directed only to those listservs, right? Only to the relevant people. And I wanted to also take this opportunity to ask the mentors in this room if they will be willing to participate in the listservs. So I'll get that. I'll get your response on that quite afterwards. Clinician consents. I'm not sure at this point with the statements that I've provided if it will be a complete necessity, but I also wanted to get your input on that. And neither Emily nor I have any interest in monetizing this application. We hope to be able to launch it in iOS application store and Android Google Play as well in the near future. And I think it could be a cool educational resource for my own program moving forward as well if we can launch it and we gain user base, and then once they're shooting questions away through the application, the trainees and mentors here can get together, utilize it during the Zoom sessions or face-to-face sessions to discuss the topic, and then provide the answers straight back to the users in a timely manner. That way, I mean, if it turns out to be successful, I think it's something that we can, the program can also utilize in a more routine fashion as well.
So we'll give 1 or 2 minutes, a couple minutes for questions, but for those of us, first, yes. Questions for Jay?
So the list of dentists that you have for kids with autism, how do they get on that list and how do they qualify for that? Do they just say they're comfortable working with that population or they're interested in?
So this is, so I don't provide a list of dentists. So what I provide is a link to a website, Autism Speaks, that already has populated that information.
Do you know how they get there?
That I do not know. So I can actually find information on how they went about gathering that data. But that's something that I can certainly look
We were wondering that too, Sandy.
Yeah.
We were like, I don't.
Because I'm thinking if you put in my zip code, I can't think of any in our zip code that would claim that, but I'd be curious to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder, you said you populate to Autism Speaks. I wonder if you also looked at the Autism Alliance of Michigan, because they have a lot of resources per zip code, per town that maybe you can pull into as well. I don't know how people get onto that either, but I think it's managed pretty frequently.
Okay, so Autism Speaks, link to Autism Speaks is the only thing that we included in there because of the convenience factor. But I'm sure there are other resources that we can look into for including. Oh, yeah, so there's another PDF file of dental directory of dentists that have, I don't know if they've necessarily shown interest in treating patients with special needs. But,
yeah, so I'll just talk a little bit more about that. Included on my FRP project, there's a PDF which is from Michigan.gov, and it's a list of dental providers who do treat patients with special care needs, and it lists them by county and all their contact information and such. So you could look at that information as well.
Yeah.
I was just curious, you're not collecting this for research, like you're using the Qualtrics. I mean, is there any IRB or anything like that that needs to?
Yeah, so I'm not using it for research. So I guess that's where the need for IRB wouldn't arise, right? Okay. But if it's an interest of this program moving forward, we can certainly look into that. And I'll be happy to work on that even after this program finishes for this cohort.
It'd be good to know, like, what are people searching for, and what's the need in the community.
Exactly, that was the whole goal of, the ask questions part, because we talk about what we think they need. We talk about what we've encountered. But I thought that this would provide a real-time input as the trainees are getting educated.
Does that form have all the zip code or anything on it as far as the information that's coming in for the user?
So, no. The preliminary questions that we ask are the only information that we're getting. And I try to limit the questions that we're asking because, wouldn't want any factor besides their email address or their first name to be an identifying factor for them because of the fact that we don't have protection at this point.
I feel
My topic essentially was to provide education of basic oral health concepts to healthcare professionals and caretakers, to increase the awareness of proper oral hygiene habits at home, diet and nutrition factors, and also preventative measures to take to, for example, severe early childhood caries. It's a big deal, but taking certain measures can help prevent a child's, oral health condition to escalate to that effect. But most importantly for me, my passion is to kind of instill this dental health ambassador concept amongst other health professionals so that in the absence of a dental provider, they can give recommendations and know when to tell their patients or refer patients to the pediatric dentist. So that's kind of the goal of my project here. And in doing that was to increase the confidence of the providers and caretakers' level of knowledge in oral health concepts. So the background, many dental problems can be prevented with the correct knowledge. The thing is, the formation of a cavity or taking good care of your oral hygiene, it's not rocket science. It's very simple, and once explained, it makes sense. So a lot of the times, people are just unaware, and I feel like education is a strong tool in breaking that barrier so that, parents, providers, they have that ability to be able to see like, okay, so maybe I shouldn't give my child juice 5 times a day throughout the day because that increases the frequency of the acidic environment in their mouth, and that leads to more susceptibility to getting dental decay. Just basic concepts like that are very simple. Early diagnosis and preventative measures are also key, just because, especially in the population of those with developmental disabilities, because they are more at risk for developing oral diseases. And also personal background. So the reason why I'm so passionate about this, because when I was a pre-dental student in San Diego, I was actually a part of a program in which we did an oral health week at an elementary/middle school where we provided oral health education based off of what we knew at the time to these students. And throughout that entire week, we incorporated games, activities, and these basic oral health concepts, and it really encouraged the children and the teachers to take a more proactive approach to their oral health care at home and their diet. So we actually included an interprofessional component in that as well. We had medical, pharmacy, nursing, and social work embedded, and that entire week became this healthcare week, and it was also a great tool in motivating the children in low-income areas to pursue a career in healthcare and to really keep track of their education. So that was my personal background. So the method of investigation for this L.I.F.E project was I implemented pre- and post-surveys at the Developmental Disabilities Conference, which was held just this past Tuesday and Wednesday in Lansing. The lovely Dr. Graywall and the lovely Jay were my co-presenters, so thank you for that. And the resources provided at yes, please wait. And the resources provided besides the presentation were the family resource projects that Jay and I had completed back in November. We also had a compilation of fast facts for oral health that was given from the American Academy of Pediatric Dentistry, and also a little handout demonstrating sensory strategies for proper toothbrushing techniques at home. So I'm not gonna give the presentation because that'd go way too long, but these are some of the topics that were covered. You can quickly read through those. I'll give you 5 seconds. Okay. And this is the data that was that we were able to get from the surveys. So we had a total of 19 participants for the surveys, which was actually really great. You can see the blue line indicates the pre-survey and the red line is the post-survey. So essentially the questions listed, I understand dentistry's role in treating children with developmental disabilities. I know what a cavity is and how it's formed, but I want to really focus on these areas. I am confident in giving oral health recommendations in regards to oral hygiene habits at home, confident in giving recommendations to proper diet and nutrition, and also what families can expect when going to a dental exam and cleaning visit with a pediatric dentist. So I mean, these results are kind of expected because the participants had just sat through a presentation for an hour and a half regarding these topics, but it's good to know that their confidence actually did go up because the whole dental health ambassador concept is being able to be an ambassador in the absence of a dental provider. So if any participant is able to really give a recommendation saying like, I think your child's diet and nutrition, for dietetics for example, like they're getting really great nutrition, but the frequency of their snacking just leads them to more susceptibility for getting dental decay. Simple concepts like that, like maybe you should go see a pediatric dentist, or stuff such as that. It's really, really simple. It's not difficult. And to quickly wrap up, so future projects that I have in mind going beyond this is, I think continuing to give presentations to those within the developmental disabilities community is one really great way to do this. But also, Jay and I had started a student organization at the School of Dentistry called Bridge of Disciplines, which focuses on interprofessional collaboration with others. So I think using this presentation outline would be a great platform to educate other students at U of M, so that they're just more well aware of dental concepts. Because I think in the medical school curriculum, they only get like half a lecture or one full lecture about the oral cavity. And it's just like, this is your tooth, this is what enamel is, and that's pretty much it. Like, these are the structures. They know nothing about the basic oral health concepts. And also, I'm actually currently working with several first-year dental, or now second-year dental students. They're talking to local schools in the Ann Arbor community to kind of start their own dental health ambassador project. So I've been kind of mentoring them through that process. So it's one of these things where in the long term, I hope to be able to continue to do this so that I can affect, positively impact those in several different school districts, wherever I may be in the future, which is really great because last night's module was over, in the year 2032, what do you anticipate doing at that time? So it was a nice reflection piece for me as well. So I feel like the L.I.F.E project as a whole was a great way for me to create this foundation for me to continue doing what I love doing in dentistry. And I still have so much to learn within dentistry and within the field of pediatrics, but I'm very thankful for this opportunity, so thank you. Any questions or concerns?
I've got
Yes.
a comment. I
Yes.
just have to say, since meeting you and Jay, I take so much better care of my teeth.
You're welcome. Yes.
Can you say a little bit more about the Bridge of Discipline? So are those graduate
Yes.
level?
So Bridge of Disciplines is an organization that Jay and I co-founded, and essentially what the idea was is that there are a lot of, interprofessionalism is a big trend in healthcare nowadays. But what we noticed at the U of M campus in particular is a lot of the interprofessional organizations, they just get students together and they just have a presentation over some topic, or they're presented to about some topic. What we really wanted to emphasize, though, was instilling the creativity within dental students and keeping dentistry at the center of our endeavors to collaborate with other professionals. So one such example, you work with students, actually Jay, you could come up here too and talk. Right. One such endeavor was we're working with medical students at the University of Michigan Student Run Free Clinic, located in Pinckney, Michigan. And what we do there is we actually see patients as a part of a transdisciplinary patient care team. So instead of healthcare being, patient sees a medical provider, and then they see, okay, something's wrong with your mouth, so go see a dentist. And then they get transferred over to a dentist. There we go. Instead, what happens is we actually see the patient at the same time. So the interprofessional collaboration and education is, in our opinion, much better because we're actually learning from each other real time as opposed to just sending patients off to different providers, but we're actually working together as a team. That's one such example of the project that we're running. We have a whole bunch of different project directors who are students at the School of Dentistry running their own individual project. Essentially, it's like a think tank organization based off of interprofessional collaboration while keeping dentistry at the center. Don't want to bore you with all the details, but that's kind of a rundown.
Do you think that could be an opportunity for future LIN trainees to
That is,
participate?
actually, yes, that would be a fantastic idea. We would just need to, well, actually, there is one thing. The School of Dentistry does have a lot of regulations, rules and regulations that Jay and I have had to go through, hurdle, jump, all this other stuff. So we would have to work something out that works well with our administrators, but if Jay, you would like to further comment on that.
However, Bridge of Disciplines is also a state-registered nonprofit organization at this point, so we can function outside of it as long as there's no, outside of the umbrella of University of Michigan, as long as there's no conflict of interest, such as soliciting funding, right? Who to reach out to and how, right? So that, in that way, we have a little bit of freedom that we've earned ourselves. I think the key point of what we do in Bridge of Disciplines is just like Philip said, inculcating this culture of entrepreneurial and creative spirit in students who are about to graduate into this world of something that they might not be fully engaged in during their education. So by experiential learning, we try to help people to understand that their potential can be met through action-based projects rather than just in-class learning, right? And we find that dental students and medical students, pharmacy, and everybody in this room have gone through these educational programs that just drill materials into our head, and we have very little opportunities to exercise those outside of class settings. And so that's kind of the initiative behind what we've done. And so we started with the project with the University of Michigan Student Work Free Clinic, for which we won about a $16,000 grant from the university. We started from that one project. We now have about 13 active projects going. We've won 3 grants total from the university at this point as well. So we're growing. We're hoping to establish this model in a more sustainable and robust way so that after we leave, it continues on.
See, Brandon's next. Let's go after Brandon.
Good job.
So, one thing I want to look at when I came to the program, I had heard about autism, but hadn't done that much work within the field of autism, not the field, but looking into autism, since my program doesn't have a focus on that, in counseling psychology. But one of the things I started seeing when I looked at the literature was that autism was diagnosed later for black children than it was for white children, up to a year and a half to 2 years later. So I wanted to look to see why that was happening. So when I looked at the research, before Donahue, Childs, and Robbins, they conducted a study. They surveyed parents.
Good job, Randy. Good job.
They surveyed parents before the autism evaluation began. And what they found was black parents were less likely to endorse concerns about autism, but they endorsed behavioral concerns. Whereas white parents knew more of the signs and symptoms of what to look for autism. When black parents did report concerns, they were often dismissed by their primary care physician, saying like, you know, your child's having some difficult behaviors now, but they'll grow out of that eventually. So that led to when black parents did report concerns about their child's behavior, they led to diagnoses of oppositional defiant disorder, or ID, which the literature says black children are more likely to have than white children. Durkin et al. Conducted a study looking at the prevalence of autism in low-income to high SES families, and what they found was that autism, there's higher prevalence in families with high SES. And as time went on, the gap closed between low-income and high SES white families, but remained the same for black and Hispanic families. Which is interesting, they said, because they would expect more children with autism to be in the black low-income families and the high SES. So that gap of information, the information is not getting to those people in the low-income communities, and that also represents a lack of access to good health care. A Mandel 2009 study indicated that black children are diagnosed about a year and a half to 2 years later than white children. 2014 study said that white children are 30% more likely to receive an autism diagnosis than black children, and 50%, this is my statement, but 50% more likely than Hispanic children. Primary care physicians are less hesitant or more hesitant to respond to concerns of minority parents, less likely to make referrals to other specialists and give them diagnoses. Some of the discussion was, is this a white diagnosis? Is this a white problem versus something that exists in black communities? And furthermore, there's a lack of preparation in residency training programs for doctors to work with children with developmental disorders. So they don't always know what they're looking for. And that, coupled with documentation of racial disparities for diagnosis and stuff, leads to a big problem. So, So the takeaways from the larger research I was looking at was that black parents are not always aware of where their child should be developmentally. We know that they don't, because of different barriers and whatnot, well child visits are not always attended after the first one. So they go there and they don't check up, get the checkup to see how their child is doing. There's a lack of information about autism in brown and black communities, also, as well as not really good working relationships between medical providers in those communities due to unique racial history. And the importance of receiving an autism diagnosis or even early intervention to mitigate symptoms is not always stressed. Because even if the child doesn't have autism, research shows that the early intervention can catch a child up, cognitively, behaviorally, and socially to meet the gains where they are. So in order to do, so my piece was, there's not a lot of culturally sensitive information. So one thing I looked at when I saw information about autism, I don't see a lot of information or pictures with black children or brown or black children on those things. So my idea was, okay, from all the information that I read, all the research, what are the key takeaways? So I broke up a handout in section. I took the CDC guidelines and put a milestone check in there. What to do, I think the what to do section for parents is most important, highlighting having a primary care physician who you feel listens to you. Be consistent with your child care provider, and if you're not consistent, make sure you have documentation when you go to the other, you transfer care. Make sure you list your child's developmental concerns before you go to your doctor's appointment and communicate that to your physician. And there's a number for early on for Kent County. So my idea was, since moms when they go to get their WIC in the DHS building, this could be one of the handouts that goes to them. Just a quick what to look for, what to do, quick fact sheet about autism. It's a basic idea, but I think it can go a long way informationally. And that's it for me.
When you were talking about initially too, I can't help but find some corroboration with Ismail was
Right,
talking about his study too. It's like, well, there you go. So what other areas or what other facilities, I'm just trying to think of other applications where this could get out, where it needs to go.
Like I was thinking, looking at where people receive care for Medicaid, for those places, maybe daycare centers, some churches, which is the main hub in urban communities. So, but I'm still looking. And then the other portion of this going down the road is like multicultural ABCs for autism diagnosis, like what to look at. Because research shows that it presents a little differently for black children. More behavioral concerns and maybe some more intense emotional outbursts as well. Things to pay attention to. So,
after school programs.
After school programs, yeah, there's a lot of need.
Camps.
Early on.
Excuse me?
Connected early on.
Oh, definitely. Any other questions? All good?
Okay, so I'm Christine, and part of what Brandon said kind of correlates well into my project about the medical professionals not being prepared to deal with people with developmental disabilities. So I am almost done with my second year of medical school, which means I'm almost done with all my didactic courses, and we have not had a single course teaching us about how to work with people with either developmental disabilities or intellectual disabilities. We had one lecture on the signs and symptoms of autism and kind of how to diagnose it, but that was 1 hour worth out of all of my training. So I think there's definitely a deficit in medical training, and my idea was to add some lectures or panels into the curriculum to address this issue, so we could talk about the disparity in healthcare using person-first language, improving the patient and provider communication, and removing some barriers to care, as well as I did a presentation to some students in my class, just people that wanted to volunteer with autism centers, and a lot of them didn't even know what ABA was. So again, it's talking about the different resources people with developmental disabilities use, because you're going to have to refer people out to places, and if you have no idea what they're going through, then you can't really help them that much. So my goal is that all medical students will be confident working with patients with developmental disabilities before they enter the rotations in their third year, where they will undoubtedly encounter people with those diagnoses. So I know there's a lot of words on this page, but I kind of left it like that on purpose because it shows that they're really just another like socioeconomically disadvantaged population. They miss a lot of breast cancer and cervical cancer screenings. People in this population, they're more likely to be obese and have poorly managed conditions. They're also less likely to receive timely vaccinations, which is kind of silly because they should be protected as well. And you can also see that they die at a much earlier age compared to the general population for the same diseases. So I worked with our P3 course director. P3 stands for, I think, patient, populations, and it's basically like our course that's not like anatomy. It's like the general how to be a doctor course, kind of. And so I tried to get a panel into the first year curriculum, but doing that, starting it this year and getting it implemented this year was really hard. So I did jump on to another panel that was already scheduled. It was actually yesterday. But it was a disabilities panel, but their idea of disabilities was people with traumatic brain injuries or spinal cord lesions. So I tried really hard to get them to add someone with Down syndrome onto this panel, and they actually didn't show up yesterday, so that was pretty disappointing. But I tried really hard. But before the panel, I collected I just made a questionnaire with 6 questions that I adapted from the assessment above. And these were the 6 questions I asked as a Likert scale of if they agree or disagree. Here are some of the results I found. This was only from 138 of the students, which was like a little over half of the first year class. I didn't get the updated information yet, but it shows that only 60% of first year students feel confident working with patients with a disability, whereas 81% feel confident communicating with their family members. So it shows that they don't really want to, they're not confident communicating directly with the person with the disability. They'd rather talk to their caregivers. And again, this is just another discrepancy showing that only 9% feel comfortable being around someone with an intellectual disability, which, 9% don't feel comfortable. Oh. Sorry about that. And then 13% don't feel comfortable even interacting with them, which is still kind of a lot considering you're going to have to interact with them at some point in your profession. Even if you're a cardiologist, you're still going to run into someone who has a disability, even if you're not trying to go into peds. I didn't really talk about the panel. So it was, like I said, it was supposed to have someone with Down syndrome. It had someone with traumatic brain injury case from a car accident and someone else who was a paraplegic from a car accident. But even when I was talking to the physicians that were in charge of this panel, did a conference call and was on some email chats with them. They were talking about, the PM&R doctor said how he picked the patients that were still mentally intact and could talk to the students. And I was like, that is not what a disabilities panel should be. Like, obviously we all know how to talk to someone in a wheelchair. Like, sure, they're in a wheelchair, they look a little different, but this guy was just like you or me other than in a wheelchair. But I think a disabilities panel should be helping us talk to the people who we're not so comfortable talking to, people who are a little different. And so it just kind of went to show, like, there's definitely an issue with our education right now, and even the people who are trying to set up these programs are not quite understanding what we should be doing. So I'm already working on getting an actual panel for next year that's just what I want it to be, just the developmental disabilities, like maybe a kid with autism, kid with Down syndrome, and some other disability like that, maybe cerebral palsy, something like that. And it actually works out well because they're restructuring the whole curriculum starting next year, so try to get that in there before they set the schedule. So I think it might be easier. So I think that would be something good to move forward. Maybe having so they're supposed to fill out the post survey between today and next week. So I'll see if their opinions changed at all. But then I think it'd be good to do a follow-up survey in a year or two to see if that information sticks at all. And then just some other ideas were to have assessments completed by the preceptors in our clinical years to see if the students are competent with this, like interacting with this patient population, to see if these panels help at all. That's about it.
How did you measure the competency? Did you do some sort of a survey, or is it published? A published survey, or is it something that can be out? Or?
So I modified some of the questions from assessment that was already made by someone else. I use it for the RE program as well, the same questions, but I haven't like assessed confidence. It's just that questionnaire, like, do you feel confident working with this patient population? But since the panel is yesterday, I haven't gotten the post-survey results yet.
But do you know, what was the name?
What was the
author, or who was the survey by?
It's the second one on this. Any other questions?
I think that this is important, and it's shocking to me to hear that there is no training and working with individuals with disability at this point in medical training for you. So I think it's great that you're taking this on, and I think it's important. And I think part of the other thing to think about with it is conveying medical results to people, and making sure that the language that is being used when talking to individuals needs developmental abilities, especially when communicating very serious things or less serious things, but recommendations and all of those. So this is really important.
And something that did come good out of the panel yesterday, even though they weren't the exact patients that I would have hoped for, they did talk about, and I think it really impacted the first years, about how some doctors would say your child's never going to walk again, or how Anthony earlier was saying how they told his parents really horrible news and they were like, yeah, for sure he's not going to do this. And I think that was really important for the first years to hear. Like, it's really important how you deliver the news to your patients, especially when you're telling someone that their child is never going to amount to anything, essentially. So that was one good thing that came out of the panel. Yeah.
I just want to say thank you, because I think it was our first face-to-face meeting. Christine came up to me and said, did you and your daughter, were you part of a patient panel at Wayne State? And yesterday we had our, I don't even know, she's 17, I think we've been doing this 12 years now. So we were part of the patient panel yesterday for the genetics rotation, which was when Christine heard her. So we know we're going to have a year off while they figure out the medical school schedule. But to hear that makes me feel good that, you know, the patient panels are really important. And you get the right people that are there. I mean, we have been there, but through our years on that patient panel, there have been a few changes too. We've had people on there with late and untreated PKU and that had trouble talking, and I think it's really helpful to see, that listeners can see that disability. And somebody who's not able to, or somebody you really have to focus on, like one of our YouTubes that we had to watch, the CPs, and how you really have to pay attention to what they're saying to you to understand what they're saying. So keep fighting for that.
Yeah, and that's why I picked the panel too, because a professor can come up here and talk to you all day long about how to deal with patients with different needs, but until you actually see someone and hear their own story, it definitely makes a big difference. So thanks for coming to our panels. Yeah.
Do you have an idea on how your pre-survey data related to the pre-survey data of this study at all? Was it similar? Was it very different?
I don't know. I'm sorry.
Was this a national study?
I don't know. I just know we've used this study for another program I'm in all the time, so I haven't actually went back to the original study in a while. I just kind of used it because I use it in other things, so sorry.
We'll take one.
Okay, I was just going to say, I know that you said it's a little disappointed with some of the patient population that maybe was represented yesterday in the panel. The one thing that I think is also important, it sounds like you maybe had some traumatic brain injury folks come, that as a professional, you tend to see a lot of people that look quote-unquote normal, but have pretty significant impairment.
Right.
And so, I think that that's another piece as well, because within education, and we get kids that they don't look any different than how they came out a year ago, but now they have a brain injury, and there are a lot of things that are different. And so I think that they're, depending on what your population was, you could certainly still learn a lot.
Right. Yeah, it was still a good thing, but yeah. I was just really upset that he said, "Oh, we picked the ones who are the most normal and functioning still." I was just like, well, that's not a good representation. But you're right. All right, thank you.
Hi, everyone. So I'll try to put a lot of information into 5 minutes. I recently just presented this yesterday for a thesis defense, so I'm kind of shortening it for you guys. So the importance of self-advocacy. So coming into this program, something I thought was super cool that we were doing is we were becoming leaders within this field and becoming advocates for families and individuals with disabilities. But something that I think is vitally important is that we instill this in the individuals with disabilities to be self-advocates for themselves. And so something that was very interesting to me was looking at disability rights, and that there are many laws out there such as the Americans with Disabilities Act, and I'm going to talk about some numbers in a slide after this, but it's very important to not just expect that these laws are out there and that these individuals are able to advocate for themselves and be able to protect themselves, but that they understand what these laws are. Just as we're in this program to become advocates, we're not just going to go out into the field and know exactly what to do. So I specifically looked at employment rates. So in 2016, it was stated that 17.5% of individuals with a disability were employed. So that's a very striking number. And it could be because of barriers that they have to overcome, as in obtaining employment or maintaining employment, understanding what their rights are, and being able to self-advocate. And we talked about many different programs within this program, and there are many different programs across the state and country that specifically teach vocational skills, but there could possibly be a lack of emphasis on teaching self-advocacy to limit the amount of additional supports that they need so they can become more independent. So I dug into the research more into self-advocacy, and Tess and colleagues did a literature review of self-advocacy training in 2005 and found that there were only 20 studies that they could find that specifically taught self-advocacy to individuals with developmental disabilities. But they took these 20 different articles and they broke down self-advocacy into knowledge of self, rights, communication, and leadership. And what was interesting from this is only a handful of studies specifically focused on knowledge of rights. So specifically relating back to the Americans with Disabilities Act. So focusing on personal rights or legal rights, and this could be an impact on why the numbers of employment could be so low. So I specifically developed a training procedure with the students that I currently work at that are in a vocational community-based setting to teach them knowledge of rights specific to reasonable accommodation. So asking for an accommodation at work and how to be protected so that they're not discriminated against. So they would watch videos and I would teach them how to go through a 3-step process to determine if a right was violated against someone or not. So really the first step is knowledge of rights, and then they can go on after this to try to advocate for themselves and to specifically practice that skill. So I have a bunch of data to show that I did improve the knowledge, but I didn't include that in here, so if you want it, I can give it to you just about time. But I created teaching materials to give to them. So this flowchart specifically goes through the 3 steps into determine if a right was violated against someone. You have to disclose you have a disability, you need to understand what undue hardship means, and then you need to know what each of the laws specifically are and how to follow them. I created this for my students who are readers and non-readers, and then also an accommodations cheat sheet. Now I only focus specifically on reasonable accommodations. There were many different laws under the ADA, but it was most applicable to the students that I currently work with, and there was a lack of research in it specifically. So kind of wrapping it all together for more future practice and research, there is a lack of research out there. I mean, the literature review only found 20 articles that specifically taught this, and even fewer of those specifically taught knowledge of rights, which I feel is a good first step into be able to advocate for themselves. So that's something that I plan to continue to do, is to continue to develop this research and continue to grow it. And what I specifically created as well can be transferred to other types of advocacy skills as well, such as health rights or personal rights. Because if a lot of these, there was also another study that I found, and 86% of teachers thought that self-advocacy training was very important, but they didn't necessarily teach it because they didn't know how to teach it, or they didn't have the resources to. So continued research, and we've learned about evidence-based practices. If we keep replicating these studies, then teachers and educators will have a better base to be able to teach their students, and we can better prepare our students as well. 17.5% is a very low number, and so we want to increase that number, obviously, to have them be contributing members in society. And so something that I also wanted to relate this to was to policy work. Taking research just like this and bringing it to legislators to talk to them why it's important to fund programs like this, to teach self-advocacy skills, to enhance the economy because it's going to just grow more jobs and they'll be able to be more successful, and then also decrease the amount of additional supports that they need. A lot of programs, they might have a job coach for 60 days and then they're continuing on with the job and then maybe they need to get another job coach. But maybe if we prepare them ahead of time and be proactive, they won't need this additional support and they can be more independent. So it was a lot for 5 minutes. So
good.
Yeah, that's it.
So the behavioral skills training model you used, did you create that?
Yeah, so the last research article that I found that did specific to the ADA, which is what I did, was done in 1998, which is a long time ago, and laws have recently changed, as we know. So I based it off of what they did, but they were more broad, as in they just taught like personal rights and kind of like really touching the surface, where I went into how do you ask to be changed to a new job if you have a disability that needs it, or ask for more breaks or for time off, because you're allowed to have that stuff. So yes, essentially.
I think this is great also for college students with disabilities. I work with college students with disabilities, and I'm like, why didn't I have this? Because this is amazing resource for
And something
broad, yeah.
Another survey I found too was, I don't know, I forget the number of individuals with disabilities in this survey, but only 40% of them even knew what the ADA was. And I think that's very alarming as well, that if you don't know the rights that protect you from being discriminated at work, how are you going to stand up and be like, hey, like I'm allowed to keep my job, or you can't fire me, or you have to hire me, or give me this accommodation. So I think just continued education is very important. And it's obviously not really high priority if it's not being done, unfortunately.
Well, if you keep working on this, you really need the
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's the goal right now. I'm taking it to San Diego and I'm on to present it, so.
Awesome.
Our Developmental Disabilities Conference presentation into our L.I.F.E project. So we switched from our original thoughts. So we're going to discuss the caregiver and child communication and the collaboration between the registered dietitian and the SLP. So why is this important? Right now, as we know, the whole point of this interdisciplinary program is there's a lack of interdisciplinary care in the management of not only neurodevelopmental disabilities, but more specifically feeding and swallowing disorders. So there's a lack of communication between these professionals. Right now, everybody's kind of in their own little bubbles, and unfortunately that's the way it's run at most clinics, and things are trying to slowly shift, but that needs to happen faster because the SLP is doing their thing, the registered dietitian is doing their thing, all of these professionals are stuck in their own little bubbles. So we really want to take this and advocate for not only our professions, but the clients we work with in promoting this care and communication. So there's some components to successful feeding for any individual, whether you have a disability or not. Everybody needs to have these things. Cognition, you need to be aware of how big of a bite am I taking? How do I lift this fork to my mouth? Do I need to chew all this before I take another bite? Things like that, those cognitive processes need to be in place in order to successfully eat with no repercussions. You need to be attentive, you need to be alert, you need to be able to stay awake, stay sustained on the task. These are all basic things we know, but this is something important that we would want to share with families and parents in educating about this topic.
Really, and just the coordination as well. So there are adaptive equipment that you can use as well. And that's a huge coordination too as well, working with the parents to continue to use those adaptive equipment, as well as the speech pathologist to recommend which adaptive equipment to use. So
yeah, so and I guess I should have started with this, but we kind of condensed some of the highlights of our Developmental Disabilities Conference presentation into this, and then we'll explain how we'll bring that to the next level of policy afterwards. So in this slide, we talk about the caregiver's relationship with the child. So if you were at our presentation at the conference, we really went into a lot of details about these parenting styles, which are the 4 in color. There's different ways that parents interact with their children when it comes to feeding and meal times. So we have the responsive parent, who, that's what we want every parent to be. So they're a facilitator of their child's feeding and meal time. They decide when the child eats, where the child eats, oftentimes what the child's eating, they have a lot of say in, but they're responsive to the child and whether the child's full, whether the child's still hungry, and they're not dictating, you need to finish all of this before you leave your seat. They're not dictating, you need to eat less, you need to eat more. They're just responsive to the child's need. There's a connection between what the child's feeling and what the parent's receptively picking up on. Then we have the controlling parent. That's the parent that says, hey, you're eating this much right now, and that's the way it's going to be. No, you can't have a snack. You need to wait till dinner, but in a very extreme sense. So there's a lot of gray area between these parenting styles, and one parent might have components of all of these different parenting styles, but the goal is that you would be mostly responsive. So the controlling parent is, just like it sounds, very controlling when it comes to the child's feeding and mealtime. Then you have the indulgent parent, and that's the parent of the child who the child says, I want chicken nuggets. And the parent's like, okay, that's what you get. You get chicken nuggets. If that's what you want, I'll make you whatever you want. If you want brownies for dinner, that's what you're going to have. They indulge in whatever the child wants. So the child says it, they demand it, and the parent follows through with that. So that's kind of a reverse from the parent being the controlling one. And then we have the neglectful parent. That's the parent that is kind of disconnected from their child. They're not really noticing if the child's hungry, if the child's full. There's just a disconnect between the parent and the child. And a lot of times this can be because the parent has a disability as well. So either they're going through depression, they're going through emotional issues, and so they're just not very aware of what's going on with the child in the feeding and meal times.
And as a professional, it's important to also know if they are food secure as well. So if the parent is neglectful, well, it's other resources that we can't give to the parents. What's important to know about the caregiver or the parenting style is that for the child, it may lead to obesity, it may lead to failure to thrive, it may lead to food aversion. So it's a very important communication that needs to be established between the parent and the child, the professional and the parent, and it really is important for quality of life for that child as well. Because I'm going to put a plug in nutrition, it all adds up to dentistry, it all adds up to psychological, so it's all a interdisciplinary practice that can be used with nutrition. So the challenges to eating with developmental disabilities is, of course, a lot of children do have complex relationships with eating, where we do get the children who only want McDonald's chicken nuggets, and they will know if it's not McDonald's chicken nuggets too. So it's working with the caregiver and the child to overcome and eat more diverse foods as well. Sensory sensitivities in the types of textures in their mouth, physical limitations that may come with developmental disabilities are a challenge, a barrier to eating. Medications as well. Medications, the drug side effects or the taste that can be left in their mouth, metallic taste, or the chance of obesity or nausea, vomiting. It's all a lot to do and a lot of challenges that can be in the way of eating. Hypotonia or stress that is associated with eating, and that really comes down to the communication and the problems that the caregiver can have between the child. Obesity, this is really kind of interesting. More children with disabilities are shown to be more obese than children without. So, and with children with autism, they're about 40% more likely to be obese than children without autism. So that is a pretty big discrepancy, and it's all leads down to reduced participation, social isolation, more disease states in children with obesity. So more research and education is needed for this, and policymakers, even with registered dietitians, speech pathologists, we could do even a cooking class or some type of demonstration with these kids as a type of community effort as well. More out resourcing physical activity for these kids to come together. In schools as well, school education for children with developmental disabilities to know how to get the special diet that they need in the school lunch program, or to make sure that they can participate in all gym activities and that type of thing. So it's all about resources and education for these kids, and with the registered dietitian and speech pathologist, we would be able to give these the recommendations needed for these kids. And this is another thing, dysphagia is a huge collaboration between the registered dietitian and speech pathologist. It recently changed, the International Dysphagia Diet recently changed in the past couple of years. So there's a gap in communication on what the child or adult could eat in the thickness or the texture of the diet. So this is really important, and it's going to be seen more, and the terminology is going to be used more as well. So the first, it's the drinks or the liquids that can be given, from thin, the regular water that we can mainly drink, to the extremely thick or an easier swallow, which she would probably be able to describe better than me. I just tell them what to eat with
Dysphagia is any problem with swallowing, just in
Right.
case anybody didn't know, but I don't want to leave anyone in the dark. It's just any difficulty with any of the phases of swallowing.
Yeah. And then it goes into the foods, from a regular diet where we can eat an apple to the liquidized where maybe applesauce would be considered. And that all gets down to, okay, are they getting enough fiber? Are they getting enough nutrients? Are they getting enough all the things that we need in our regular diet? So yeah.
So other than that, we had some research on the importance of the collaboration. There have been studies done showing that outcomes are improved when the registered dietitian and the SLP collaborate. So like we said, this is just kind of a spin-off of our much larger 60-plus slide presentation that we did at the conference. And then we kind of came to the conclusion, if you watched our conference, I think you would agree, that it's a very user-friendly PowerPoint that parents could understand, that other professionals could understand, and everybody could be taking away information from this original PowerPoint, which I pulled up. So our goal with this would be to bring it to not only families, educate them on different types of feeding disorders, red flags for these feeding disorders, but also for other professionals so that they're watching for these things in the children that they're working with, being aware of those red flags and things like that. And then also bringing it to policymakers and legislators and showing them that there is research that shows that outcomes are improved when the registered dietitian and the SLP collaborate. So we kind of took this, and like we said, we want to bring it to a larger scale in all areas: families, other professionals, the interdisciplinary aspect, and then policy as well. Yeah, any questions?
So in our clinic, we do a lot of feeding with different kinds of food refusal, whether it be noncompliance or whatnot. And experts in our field had recommended that before you do any kind of a feeding program from a behavioral standpoint, that you would first get some sort of an evaluation. And what you were talking about there are the things that they talk about in the literature, like the ability to swallow correctly, the ability to move the food back and forth, and there's like some signs and symptoms that I recommend to our behavioral staff, like do they articulate poorly, are they nonverbal, those kinds of things, which would also probably tell you that there may be some issues with that. But one of the things I have a hard time is telling them where to go to get that kind of an evaluation. If they go to a general speech clinic, like they don't know what we're talking about, like what is that called, or where do we go for that?
So from my experience, a lot of school SLPs aren't competent in feeding and swallowing. When SLPs finish school, it's medical or it's school, and people tend to stay in those tracks. So I would recommend making sure you're going to a medical SLP and not approaching your child's school SLP. I mean, you can try or see if they have recommendations, but the likelihood of them being able to treat it is just not likely. So I would go to an SLP outpatient clinic, a hospital, somewhere where you know the medical SLP is working every day with clients that have feeding and swallowing issues, and then having them do an evaluation. So when they do their evaluation, they're going to do those things that you talked about, looking at all phases of the swallow, doing an oral mech exam. They're also going to look at those behavioral aspects. So they might invite, I mean, if it were me personally, I would invite the family and have them kind of reenact a mealtime as well, so that I can watch that caregiver style, just like I was talking about, to see if maybe this parent is contributing to this feeding disorder. And something we talk about in this presentation is that organic and medical feeding disorders can turn into a behavioral or social feeding disorder, and vice versa. Behavioral food aversion could turn into something organic. So it's important to look at all of those things to find the nature and the etiology of the feeding disorder, so then you know what to recommend for intervention. So in our conference presentation, we talked about some of the red flags for organic and medical feeding disorders versus behavioral red flags. So if we were to give this presentation to families, they would be able to write some of these things down and say, okay, these are things that I need to look for. Oh, my child's doing all of these. I need to get in for an evaluation right now. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Thank you.
You had mentioned that you thought this had policy implications. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, because as we were saying before, there's not, we're slowly but surely getting into an interdisciplinary service delivery model, but we're kind of slow in that aspect. So we would hope that if we were to bring this to legislators or policymakers, we could get something rolling. I don't know exactly, but come up with something so that this is a more common service delivery model. And maybe it's that it's a requirement. Maybe when you approach an SLP or a registered dietitian for an evaluation, you must have the other one present. So if an SLP is going to do the evaluation, she must have a registered dietitian present for the evaluation. So, I mean, maybe that's something that could come up, that maybe making it a requirement, just kind of pushing for that interdisciplinary service model.
And I know with nutrition as well, a lot of insurances don't cover really a meeting with, I mean, diabetes definitely, but as a meal plan, if a parent comes up to a doctor and is like, hey, can I get a referral for a registered dietitian and will it be covered? It's likely not to be.
Whereas
so that's a problem.
SLP, OT, PT a lot of times are covered under that insurance cap. So if they get the SLP services, the child can go to the SLP for maybe a food aversion because of the sensory aspects that go into feeding. And it should be that SLP's job to contact the registered dietitian, and that's not always done. I know, for example, in my clinic at CMU, a lot of us work with children with autism who have a food aversion, and we don't talk to a registered dietitian. It's just not a practice that we're practicing right now, but it should be. It just should be second nature when you get a child referred to you with a food aversion, with dysphagia, anything like that. It should be a requirement that there has to be a consultation with a registered dietitian. So that's kind of what we were thinking along the lines of that, and bringing this presentation, not only to educate them on what each of us do in our own individual roles, but then going down to some of the research on the interdisciplinary collaboration in the partnership, because there were articles kind of outlining that, which we have here. So, yeah.
Yeah, this is and then also looking at the interplay between the medical and the behavioral, is they're usually combined in the same. So it's an opportunity for some advocacy from, our Department of Behavioral Health Division. And, we pay for things medical out of one pot and things behavioral out of another pot, which makes it very difficult. And then the other thing that is very difficult is that most services by a dietitian are not covered for the individual. Dietitians often work within a hospital where they're an integral part of the team, but to do it as an just send an individual patient as an outpatient, I run into that all the time. Love to have you see a dietitian, and you have to pay for it out of pocket.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's some advocacy needed for payment reform for more integrative services, and for recognizing the importance of the dietitian, because it isn't just about the skills, it's also mean, I know for a lot of the kids that I follow with autism, how can we make sure they're getting adequate nutrition given their, extreme pickiness, just giving a vitamin is not.
Right.
So there's there's some advocacy stuff we can hear that we should, maybe put on a back burner.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? Yeah.
Back to the interdisciplinary place, he's dental and registered dietitian.
Absolutely.
I'd love to have some sort of a collaboration there as well. Because we know a lot of the reward systems that kids have are not the healthiest options when it comes to their teeth.
And it all goes down to the education and the parent styling and what's going to make the kid happy. Well, what makes us all happy? A huge cookie the size of their face, like dessert. But I mean, it's like
I had 2 of them already.
So cheers to you.
I
But
wish I
I
had
mean,
you.
and everything about nutrition. But and there's a lot of misinformation about nutrition as well, which is frustrating for any individual as well. Because on one side of the spectrum, there's, hey, the keto diet is great, but on the other aspect, you're like, well, it's not actually a sustainable diet, so it's not a sustainable lifestyle. So what are we going to do to really help the child, especially with a developmental disability who's already challenged with enough everything in life? Okay, how can we make that mealtime enjoyable? So, and that's between us to make it the most enjoyable, the most nutritious, as well. So,
And I can give a specific example, just quickly. Let's say, for example, I gave this at the conference, but let's say you have a 4-year-old that's drinking nothing but Pediasure because she has a severe food aversion, she has autism, and so she comes to your clinic drinking nothing but Pediasure because mom's frustrated and that's the only thing she can get her to consume, and that's what's necessary to keep her alive at this point because she refuses all foods put in front of her. Slowly easing her into foods, yes, the SLP can do that, but even working with this child and building up her food repertoire, the SLP isn't knowledgeable in what food groups, I mean to an extent what food groups are necessary, but the specific amounts of how much of those and how those can be increased for a child who's 5 or 6, because it's not going to be the same as an adult. And as well as that, going to the dental perspective, what is that Pediasure doing to her teeth and what can be done about that? So I can see in like a real world example how this is necessary, but it's not being done. And the goal of this is how can we make that best practice, even though in our heads, yes, we know, but it's not happening, so.
John and then Peggy.
So my presentation is going to be a little different. I think maybe some of you know my first master's is in clinical neuropsychology, and now I'm in the neuroscience PhD program. So I was thinking about doing a project that was more clinically oriented, and then I figured this is an interdisciplinary program that maybe I got brought in here for that reason. So I'm going to show you guys a little bit about the research I'm doing now. So my name's John Gallion. For my projects, I was really characterizing a mouse model of autism. Specifically, we're looking at the role of early postnatal cell cycle dysregulation. So there's a lot of difficulties with getting a rodent model of autism spectrum disorder. Specifically, it's behaviorally oriented, and it's really hard to elicit those same human behaviors in mice. So we have a large variety of rodent models out there, and there's really no universal consensus about their validity. So other difficulties include, we still don't really know the neurobiological basis and etiology of autism spectrum disorder. And since it's such a complex disorder and it presents itself in so many different ways, when you're thinking about preclinical treatment options, no one treatment is going to be universal for all behaviors. So just an example, we took a look at three of the strongest genes correlated to autism spectrum disorder, and they've knocked those out in mouse models. And essentially, you get none of the behavioral phenotype that we see. So already we're saying, yes, there's a strong genetic component in humans, but there has to be something else kind of underlying this disorder. So recent meta-analysis have come out and have found great correlation between autism and cancer risk genes. So if you take a look on the left here, you have the autism-associated genes, and on the right is all of their predefined roles in cancer. So when we took a closer look at the analysis of these genes, we see that a lot of them are involved in cell cycle, particularly cell proliferation and differentiation, and their particular pathways. And these are both similar in autism and in cancer. So focusing on this kind of cell cycle aspect, we took a look further. More research is showing the use of cancer drugs to treat autism spectrum disorder in rodent models. And we're getting pretty good efficiency with that. So building off this, we have a cell cycle model. So briefly, for those of you who don't know, and the eukaryotic cell cycle division is separated into 4 phases. You have a G phase, the cell grows, and the S phase, it starts to make copies of its DNA and organelles. And the G2 phase, it continues to grow and gets prepared to separate. And then the last phase is the M phase for mitosis. So what we have done is we have this oncogene protein. It's essentially a cancer gene. And what we do is we use that in order to elicit cells into the cell cycle. So specifically, we use this SV40 large T antigen. And what it does is it suppresses the tumor suppressing proteins, P53, and the PRB, it's the retinoblastoma protein. And this causes cells to leave the G1 phase and enter the S phase without fully entering into mitosis. So you can see it's similar to the roles it plays in cancer, but it doesn't fully divide to create tumors. So the way we get this gene to express in our mice, we use a calcium calmodulin kinase 2 alpha gene promoter, it's just a long name. But essentially what we do is we can control the expression of the SV40 gene through the diet. We use a TET-off system, TET stands for tetracycline, and we use one of the analogs called doxycycline. When the animals have doxycycline in their diet, their gene SV40T is suppressed, and when we remove that from their diet, it starts to express. So when we take doxycycline out of the animal's diet, they start going into the cell cycle only in the brain, and this is what we're looking at for the autism phenotype. So here's kind of my breeding scheme. I have homozygous tag mice. The tag mice are the ones that carry the SV40 gene. And we cross those with heterozygous off mice. Now the off mice are the ones that carry that TET-off gene promoter. And so essentially we'll get mice that either have tag positive, off positive, which we're hoping to be our phenotype, or the tag positive, off negative that does not express the gene. And we use those mice as a control in our study. So I'm just going to briefly go over some of the behavior we did. I gave you all a little bit of a handout. Grooming, it's the most common behavior that we use in autism spectrum disorder for rodent models because of its similarities and facility to the human population. So specifically, we're looking at repetitive grooming, more bouts, more time grooming than the control mice. So as you can see in our model, we had a very significant effect for genotype. So our autism mice are grooming longer and have more bouts in duration than our wild type mice. Another thing we're looking at is social interaction. I have the definition on the papers if you guys want to look at it. Briefly, it's just going to look at sociability and social interactions between mice that don't know each other. Because in autism, we're looking for social deficits, and so we're using that in our model. Here's some of the data we have. We're showing some decreases in social interaction, but we don't quite have the N yet. One of the problems with using double transgenic mice is they're kind of difficult to breed. It's almost like nature's form of eugenics. If a parent notices that its pup is physically or cognitively deformed, they typically cannibalize it. So I only get about 1 out of 8 mice is usable for my study. So in addition to the behavior, we're looking at some of the biochemical and neuroinflammatory changes that you see in the human populations, specifically activated microglia and astrocytes, which we see well throughout the cortex and many parts of the brain in our model. So what we're going to do in the future is we will wean our mice, and we're going to be putting them on this special diet, and this diet has a microglia inhibitor inside of it. So what we're hoping to do is to reduce the amount of neural inflammation that's postnatal and see if we can reverse some of the behavioral deficits that we see in our mice. So we give them this diet for about a month and a half. After that, 2 months, I'm going to do behavior testing on these mice. And then I will sap them. Either I will perfuse them in 4% paraformaldehyde and section their tissue. That way I can look at immunohistochemistry, see the different biochemical changes that are occurring in our rodent model compared to the wild-type model. Or I will do rapid decap. And this is more like a surgical procedure where I remove the hippocampus and the striatum and the cortex separately and flash freeze those, and I'll break those down for Western blotting so I can really look at the fine protein analysis and the changes that we see in our model. That's what I have for you. Any questions I'll attempt?
I just have a comment. I just want to say I really admire your research and your intelligence. I mean, some of this I understood, but some of it I wasn't following as much. But it really just goes to show how necessary this is for the future of research on autism and other disabilities. Even though you may not be working directly one-on-one with these individuals, it's still just as relevant as what we're doing.
Yeah, thanks. It was kind of refreshing. You know, I was a clinician and did my master's. I taught at an autism center and kind of, you know, I had in my mind, this is how you treat autism behaviorally, if needed pharmacology, but I didn't really get into the ideology until I came to this program.
Okay, so I think I got it. So the grooming is supposed to represent like the stereotypy
Yes.
in kids. Okay, and the goal of it, like, were you trying to create autistic mice?
Yeah, so we're trying to characterize a model. This genotype of mice doesn't exist anywhere on the planet. We invented it in our lab to study specifically the role of cell cycle. So a lot of the models out there, they're using the same genetic mutations that we'll find in human populations, and then they'll find the rodent-like homologue, and then they'll knock that out or adapt it. What we're doing is trying to study an idiopathic mechanism. So cell cycle etiology, there's a lot of research showing that there's some differentiation going on in the brain, but not full mitosis. So theoretically, our model kind of works, and we'll see how it plays out. Yeah.
So I don't remember the exact gene. Was it SG something?
Yeah, so it's SV40T. It's a simian vacuolating virus.
And you used a tetracycline or doxycycline-based
Gene promoter.
gene promoter. Okay. Is that something that would also work in human cells? Or is this specific to a rodent model?
So theoretically, it could, because we have it. It's conditional to the brain, so it'll only work in the brain. Whether or not someone would actually try this in a person, I have no idea.
From a clinician point of view, when I hear tetracycline and doxycycline,
Antibiotics.
And something that dentists actually prescribe for periodontal disease, and again, reducing inflammation and bacteria and things. And then my mind starts going in direction about association of antibiotic use in developing children and claims of autism and things like that. So I don't know.
Yeah, well, the way we use it is just to promote our
if I'm thinking
gene.
too
So
much.
none of the effects are actually coming from the antibiotic. It's just used to promote that SV40 gene. So essentially, it's like a driver and a promoter, and the gene would be what drives the cell cycle differentiation, and then the CAM kinase 2 alpha. It's unique because it gets conditionally neuronally expressed at different points during postnatal development, and so we can narrow that expression just to the brain, and it doesn't start cell cycle throughout other places.
I think it's very dangerous. Little knowledge is dangerous, so I think I should keep quiet.
Yes.
Is part of your hypothesis that inflammation is related to autism?
Yeah, so we know from studies that there's massively increases in activated microglia in prefrontal cortex, striatum, occipital lobe, and cerebellum in autistic patients. So we're seeing a lot of those same similarities, biochemical similarities in our mice, and we're trying to see if we reduce some of that information, if we can reverse some of the phenotypes. So it's not like a end-all be-all or by any means some sort of cure. It's just we're looking at one aspect and see if we can kind of further understand one of the interwoven players.
So is it fair to say that the level of expression of your genotypes is pretty calibrated throughout the entire cohort?
Yes, yeah. So I do have IHC stains, and put them on that for this, but you can see how it gets differentially expressed all throughout the cortex.
Okay. So just how variable were the phenotypes? If all the expressions were all the same.
So I think you can see here, pretty variable for some of the things. Grooming was a lot better. Everything was like a real kind of tight knit. It's the social interaction, and with mice, you know, there's a million things that are going to depend on it. Whether or not when I was bringing them down the hallway, did they see rats? You know, are they in their estrous cycle or are they not? What time of day you do the testing at, the temperature of the room, the lighting, and we try to keep all these confounding variables similar, like in the same, but it's best we can do with our science at this moment. So. Anything else?
So besides eating them, do the mice have any the typical mice have any other kind of reaction to the supposed autistic mice? Like, do they, I don't know, socialize with them, exclude them?
No, so they're all raised together. They're all like litter mates and cage mates. You know, some of them get born with both genes and some don't. They kind of treat each other normally, except for the parents. We know that our animals carrying both double trans genes get cannibalized a lot more often than the other ones do.
So they know.
It's okay. As long as that's good.
So my presentation is going to be a continuation of one of my previous presentations about having an awareness and just trying to understand what it is like to be in the shoes of someone who has autism. And just a background, we know that health promotion and health prevention practices are not always sought by persons with autism in families just because of past negative experiences or a fear that they may have going to a health provider. And we also know that health profession students have limited exposures and experience in clinical as well as in classroom. So a PICO question that I developed for my project was for health students, does awareness and practice of empathy increase when autism training is conducted as an interprofessional education activity as compared to an intraprofessional environment? So interprofessional is working of two different disciplines working together, not just in the same classroom hearing the same things, but actually crossing boundaries and getting to know what the other does for roles and responsibilities and help problem solve through things. Where intraprofessional is like having different level nurses working together trying to learn something or figure something out. So I'm part of an interprofessional team at the University of Michigan, and through this fellows team we have to also do a project. So what we did is we developed a program to have an interprofessional delivery of a training module, and we had 6 second or first year dental residents and 6 undergraduate senior level nursing students. And we did a lot of data collection pre and post training, and we used the Jefferson Scale of Empathy, we used the Interprofessional Socialization and Valuing Scale. We had 2 of those, and then we also had qualitative data that was collected, so it's a mixed methods approach. Here are the milestones and timelines, and you can see we actually started working on this over a year ago, and even before our LEND training started. So we've been working on program development. It's had IRB approval, and we did our pilot March 6th. And so we are in the process of analyzing the data. We have some preliminary results, and we've done 1 presentation, and we have 2 others that are scheduled. And then we also have our final results that we have to publish an update on everything. So to give you an idea of what our program was that we made was we had a Canvas component, so it's online. And so our participants had to view the videos, which I showed at one of the previous presentations, and do the evaluation. So we actually had like 5 videos that they had to watch. So more on like content, what is autism, and go through explaining that.
And when we had our 2-hour training that we had in the School of Nursing, one of the components was a VR experience, so a simulation branch of that. So we had the Oculus Rift. It was a 2.5-minute program that they watched, and you can see we had a pre-briefing before going in there. This is the actual goggles that have the speakers in them that you listen to, and this is a person using it, and it's all run by the computer. And we had a couple different groups that we had for time constraints. So when one group was in the VR room, the other one was watching the videos that I had shown with Carly's Cafe. And then the next activity we had was our interprofessional work groups, where we had students that were purposely put together, so there was equal number of nurses and dentists in a group, and they had to approach going through a case study and figuring out what the other profession was going to do. How would they work through that? So they were sort of brainstorming without a lot of prior knowledge, just on their assumptions. And then we had them write it down, and then we went through it and clarified that information from the profession that actually does do that. And so they were learning about each other's roles and responsibilities with that. And then we had them start working through things more and telling us how they were actually coming up with a plan. And then my partner in this is Dr. Graywalt, and we had an entire chalkboard that we were using up here, and so we were able to make columns about dentistry and about nursing and about the family approach. And so we were able to see common themes among all of those that were coming through with that, and eventually get to working on our care plan for a 12-year-old patient with autism that we had as our case. And so some preliminary things that we had heard back on the qualitative data, these were some things that came through here. Some of the dental comments that were very interesting is that it's eye-opening. That was a common theme with that. And then the last one here, where they're going to be more cognizant about the barriers that families face and to best assist in making the child's dental experience as efficient as possible. And the nurses had very similar comments about that this was beneficial and amazing. And another part of this that we looked at in addressing the PICO question is this effective in raising empathy and awareness. So we were seeing some things that were significant on running a very simple t-test, and we were able to see some correlation between what we were seeing with some qualitative things and some quantitative items. So we're going to look at that further, but that is just some things that we noticed right away, that there's some very interesting data that is yet to be explored. And we are waiting for our reports to come back from the Jefferson Empathy Scale. We've already presented at Health Professions Day at U of M, and I just want to mention that other things where this has led me is not only with this group, working with my interprofessional group at U of M, I've learned about a lot of other things that are existing within the U of M system. For example, like at the security department, there's a sibling with autism, one of the managers there, her sibling has autism. And so she does presentations for the units because they have kits that they want to have in place that if any family member or somebody is visiting or in a clinic, that they might have something in their kit if it's needed. If somebody is having a moment and the caregiver might not have anything, they have things like Mardi Gras beads, fidget spinners, the heavier blankets. There's a lot of different things in there that are available. And so the security department at UMHS is the one who would think that security is involved with that. But out of the networking and connections, it was a very interesting person to meet up with. We've also had a lot of response from parents of children who have autism talking to us when we are presenting our poster. And those are the people that always come up first and are talking about it. So that's really interesting to talk with them and very inspiring and motivating. And I also want to thank my mentor, Jennifer Larson,
for mentoring me during this time, and Dr. Hurwitz and my partner, Dr. Grable. This is just how I see like my partnership with everything with Lend and what I'm doing as within the School of Nursing. And so the products that I have is this interprofessional program, and those are the places that we have on our book so far. And that's what our poster looks like. We also brought it if you want to see it for real.
So the VR experience was actually being a person with autism in a cafe and experiencing the sights and sounds on how a person would experience if you had autism. So it was overwhelming, but also very real.
Do you have, oh, sorry. I just think this is so cool, and I don't know with the equipment, is that something that you own, or is it something that we could have trainees experience? Could we have a day like you did and with for Lend trainees?
Yes, we can, if we have more money. So, we have a small grant that funded the initial pilot, and so future steps are going to be writing for another grant because the School of Nursing owns the system. I was just searching around. Oculus Rift is now coming out in 2018 with a mobile model, and but it needs its own dedicated computer for optimum delivery of this. So that would be something that we're looking at, because we are looking at hopefully taking it on the road where we're not just stuck in one place. So.
All right. Through this program, majority of my presentations discussed voice. I presented on the challenges of my daughter being diagnosed with speech apraxia and finding her voice. My acceptance into the My Lend was to bring a family voice to the team, and my discipline in education provides me a voice to advocate with families and students in districts and amongst the community. When thinking about this topic for our L.I.F.E project, I focused on the disconnect of families losing their voices to support the educational services for family members with disabilities. It was brought to my attention about an I.F.S.P. and an IEP, and this is where I'm seeing the most disconnect at this time. The I.F.S.P. focuses on child and family and services that the family needs to help enhance the development of their child, whereas an IEP focuses on the educational needs of a child. So from birth to age 3, you're using an I.F.S.P., which is that focused family center being ran for programming, where then when you transition from 3 to 21, it's going to be educationally driven. The problem lies within funding. The federal government has money for educational supports, but it doesn't allocate equal money to be distributed to families to develop this piece of the family-centered portion. Hence, families are losing their voice to discuss what best practices are to support their families in the journey with disability. As a family member, a person with disabilities, I feel the weight of the world because my focus is not just on education, but also what's going to happen with my daughter? Like, is she going to be able to live independently? What's going to look like for daily living skills, social and emotional growth, employment, transportation, supported living, etc. It's a fine balance between adequately supporting families and the services that the family needs to help them enhance quality of life, which does include education. But even as an educator, I feel strongly that it shouldn't be educationally driven. We need to push for policy to have it be family-centered. With this L.I.F.E project, I saw a need to empower families on the importance of sharing their stories. Our voices matter, and we need to advocate for change. Throughout this program, I was involved in a series of presentations, consulting work to develop a transition program, and a parent-focused panel to help the transition to kindergarten and beyond. This was a great fit, being that I was a kindergarten teacher, but also currently in my life being directly impacted by the creations of I.F.S.Ps and IEPs for my daughter. I started developing a presentation for schools, and this is where I focused a lot on staff and students and who would be essentially being supported in an inclusive setting for individuals with disabilities and for the idea to keep in mind that the audience would be future employers and support personnel for our DD community. I think I might have switched ahead to the next slide, but I'll keep it at this one. The next series in my presentation was at the university level. So here I'm at the university level, where I spoke to multidisciplinary teams about my personal journey raising a child with disabilities and how their professions impacted our lives and matter because they help develop quality of life, not just for my daughter, but also for my family. The focus being on how to develop working relationships where a family-centered approach could drive patient-client care and support, but also the importance of trust and how to build trust with families that are experiencing difficult situations. The next series in my presentation, or actually the last series in my presentation, was developed with families in mind. I wanted to share my experiences and develop how to be the best advocate for your child. I had the opportunity to sit and participate in several family focus groups. I also had the opportunity to create and lead a parent panel. I worked closely with a multidisciplinary team to help develop a transition to kindergarten program at MSU, which is training parents currently on how to navigate their first IEP experience. And I actually will be doing another presentation for them on May 1st to kind of give them another perspective on tips and traits of that first IEP experience. This also was really important to me because it's allowing the families to be able to advocate for themselves and not have someone else do it for them. So it's been a very empowering experience for me, and I think it's been very worthwhile. So in closing, my next steps will be looking at how this project could drive policy by empowering these families to see the importance of their voice and that our voice has power and we should push for change. To not solely rely on research and data from experts, but to rather create a team to work together to show the whole picture of an ideal partnership and programming for the neurodiverse community. Our stories matter, our voices should be loud, and I wanted to continue to show families that they need to show up, that they need to be present, and that we need to fight for the support. We know firsthand how challenging and rewarding it can be to support individuals with disabilities, and that we need funding and great programming to support the quality of life for these very important contributors to society. I just want to take a moment real fast to thank my mentor, Dr. Sarah Douglas at Michigan State University. Not only has she supported me personally, but I feel like she's grown me as a professional. Also, Michigan State University's RAD Lab and the ELI Lab, East Lansing Public Schools, Hazlet Public Schools, and Jenison Public Schools in Grand Rapids also allowed me to come in and kind of do this training and let me be creative and let me work outside of the box. So that is my presentation. I'm very sorry that I can't be with you today, but I appreciate everything you guys have done for me in the MyLEN program, and I feel very empowered to work with such wonderful cohort and individuals going into the neurodiverse field. Thanks.
Hey, Michelle, I can ask a question.
Okay, super.
I'm here. And so what was the experience like working with Hazlet, Jenison, and East Lansing Public Schools as far as working with administrators, other teachers, because I know that's something that many folks will run into roadblocks when working with groups within the schools as far as transition and new ideas as well.
Right. I think that's a great question. It was a little bit of a challenge at first. I had a great relationship with Jenison Public Schools in Grand Rapids. They actually run an inclusive preschool program that my mentor had told me about. So at the very beginning of my program, I went out there when we had to do our project, the QRI project, I think it was, and I helped them develop a map for their paraprofessionals on how to allow them to get support and adequate breaks so that they could come in refreshed to work with a very challenging group of students that they have this year. And so right away when I contacted them with this idea about doing a presentation within the classrooms to kind of work with students and then to work with their teaching staff, they were like on board. The principal was amazing. He's like, come on out, Michelle, it's been fabulous. But I had built that relationship, like they saw me in action before I suggested, hey, I'd like to come and do some, you know, quote unquote trainings for you. And so that went really well. East Lansing Public Schools was great too because I am an alumnus of Michigan State University. I did my student teaching in East Lansing Public Schools. So again, I had a reputation with them. They allowed me to come right in. It wasn't a problem. So that was great. The most challenging one was with Hazlet Public Schools because that is where currently my kids reside and our students. So with my son's school, it wasn't a big deal. They were like, yeah, come on in. But with my daughter's school, they were guarded because she goes there and we have a relationship where I am advocating for her services, right? So it was a little bit of a conflict of interest, I guess, maybe, but we worked through it. And honestly, it's been a really rewarding experience because I felt like it's also built our relationship as having them come into my tribe. They know where I stand. They know that I actually have really great ideas as do they. And so it was a rewarding experience there too. But yes, definitely had some challenges. I had to do a lot of listening. I had to talk about a lot of things that they were concerned about. But in the long run, I just kind of kept at it. And I didn't take no for an answer. And I was just like, hey, I really need to do this for my program. Can you help me out? And it helped out with having that personality. So.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I want to share with you what I've been doing as a diversity fellow. I'm doing a diversity fellowship through the Michigan Developmental Disabilities Institute with Dr. Jakes. It's an inaugural fellowship, and hopefully there will be more. Haven't heard otherwise. If you are interested in learning more about the fellowship, please reach out to me, Dr. Jenks, Sharon, or Ann. So they're all very knowledgeable. So the goal of the fellowship is really to fund a fellow who is a member of a racial or ethnic minority group that's underrepresented in the intellectual developmental disabilities field to increase their knowledge and skills in the area of leadership, cultural competency, and networking across disability-related organizations. So essentially to promote change and reduce barriers experienced by people with intellectual and developmental disabilities among underserved, underrepresented populations. So for me, I thought this was a great opportunity that as an Arab American who is trained in psychology and trained in neuropsychology and has received extensive training for autism assessment and evaluation, to use that experience, to use that knowledge, and to reach out to a community where much of my current career identity was shaped, which is among the Arab American population, specifically ACCESS, which is a community mental health organization. It's more than mental health. It's a broad organization that serves Wayne County at large, and it provides many different services from social health, mental health, behavioral, recreational, and economic services. So I thought I would connect with ACCESS to really make a connection to the community at large with the mindset that we can create greater awareness about autism, autism assessment, early detection, and to give parents as well as clinicians within the autism, within the ACCESS community, where can they guide parents to if they have concerns? What does assessment look like? What is the process really, which can be very long and daunting and overwhelming, and for many families that obtain services through ACCESS, they usually come from backgrounds with very limited resources and knowledge. There are additional cultural and language and financial barriers. So my connection with ACCESS as a hope to sow a seed for continued collaboration to promote greater awareness about early detection and what parents can do if they are concerned. Southeast Metro Detroit, and really Michigan as a whole, is a home to a large group of Arab Americans. Metro Detroit is home to the largest concentration of Arab Americans, and there are some unique factors about the Arab Americans in the Detroit area versus the U.S. at large. Many of them came in the later parts of the immigration wave. They came from foreign countries, unstable societies. A lot of them are new immigrants, first generation, learning the language, learning how to adapt to life in a new country, and the majority of them are Muslim American. In contrast, Arab Americans around the United States are predominantly Christian. They've been here during the first wave and second wave of immigration in the early 20th century, and they tend to have better establishment in the cultural than the Arab Americans that we see in Detroit. It's a broad generalization, but those are key characteristics that gives you insight into some of the barriers that they may face. So I had to develop a capstone project, and the project was to really develop intervention type meetings with parents as well as with the mental health staff at large, and to provide them with basic information about the latest science of autism assessment and treatment and causal factors and some maybe some of the controversies that are associated with what causes autism, or specifically the vaccination association with autism, because that's, as was communicated to me, was a big issue. And many families that are coming there for health services have also abstained from obtaining vaccinations. So I felt that would be an important component to address as well. So the meetings were going to be with parents. We held one 2 days ago, which went very well, and we're scheduling another one that's coming up in May or June. And the Access mental health staff, I will present to them next month as well. So I want to share just quick data from the first meeting, and it's mostly frequency data from the surveys that they were asked to complete. There were 8 adults. They were all women. Some of them came with children, and there were 3 other staff that helped with some of the translations. Although I speak Arabic, it can be very difficult to translate complex topics, and there are dialect differences, so having really a clinician from Egyptian background, Lebanese, and Yemeni, we really captured a good spectrum. So the results from the survey, many of those that attended were not very familiar or somewhat familiar with autism. Some were very familiar and have children who have been diagnosed with autism. However, half of them knew someone with autism, and 7 of the 8 that came had a child with developmental disability. 2 of those have been diagnosed with autism. Many of them reported difficulties obtaining assessment and treatment that span a wide range of barriers, from language, from collaboration with their pediatrician. Their pediatrician just may have told them, don't worry about it, they'll grow out of it, as well as cultural stigma that for the families that actually came, they may be a biased sample because the ones that may harness those greater biases may have not come at all or didn't want to be out in public talking about autism or be associated with autism. So they were all getting, those that have been diagnosed with developmental disability, the primary interventions came from early on as well as school-based. And many of them communicated that we'd like to learn more about autism assessment and treatment and what can be done in the schools for their children, as well as if there are Arabic resources, because 5 of the 8 completed the Arabic survey, meaning that they prefer Arabic as the primary means of communication. So what remains are to do another meeting. We're designing a better outreach to have more come in, so we're trying to get a bigger venue for a meeting, as well as the upcoming meeting with all the staff, and I would be interested to see what comes from the results of that survey, and obviously to continue the collaboration and link these major institutions from Wayne State, the Michigan Developmental Disabilities Institute, LEND, AUCD, Children's Hospital, the Autism Center, the University of Pediatricians, as well as Access. So the more collaboration and continue fostering a greater dissemination of information. suggestions? Yeah, all right,
I'll say
thank you.
also, just one other piece here that, this work is great, Ramsey, thank you. We have, the Michigan Developmental Disabilities is part of the 3 partners for our state DD network. So that includes the University Center of Excellence on Developmental Disabilities, or UCED, the Michigan Developmental Disabilities Council, and the Michigan Protection and Advocacy. And so, so the research that Ramsey's doing will help inform some efforts that the network is doing on behalf of the state to make our programs and services across our state accessible and inviting to all types of people from all types of backgrounds. So this is one of the first projects that's going to help inform that. So I think, thank you, Ramsey. This is really going to be very informative to that group.
It's been fun, and I look forward to finishing it up.